that's more in teal, or the lighter colored area in the middle, we have what's called a combined sewer system, where both domestic sewage from homes and businesses collects and combines with stormwater and flows through this system of pipes, a single system of pipes, into the advanced wastewater treatment plant, where it's treated before being discharged to the Conestoga River. And combined systems like ours are common in historic cities. You can go to the next slide, please. If you might know, there is quite a lot of infrastructure involved with these systems. I'm not going to read through all of the statistics there, but I want to point out just one for you to think about, just to begin to visualize the impact of these severe storms. And that is over 3,000 stormwater inlets that must be kept clean of leaves and debris in a storm event, mostly to help with alleviating localized flooding, which can be a real problem. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this is a picture of the Water Street Sewer Extension construction from 1907. It gives an idea of how old some of the city's infrastructure is. We've been using this picture at some of the public education events that we've been doing recently, and the public it's really beginning to resonate with them how old this city infrastructure is. Also talking with them about the challenges of maintaining this older infrastructure. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about some of the extreme storms that we've seen recently, Hurricane Ida, and the impacts that they can have, some of which are visible and some of which are not as visible, such as damaged infrastructure and sewage backups in basements. During Hurricane Ida, a manhole cover near McCaskey was thrown over 10 feet. Those manhole covers weigh about 250 pounds. And on Hershey Avenue, we had so much head pressure in the sewer main, it picked up a concrete handicap ramp built on top of a 1-inch steel roadway plate, scoured the subgrade underneath it, and dropped the whole unit, weighing about 5,000 pounds, back down onto the ground. Looking at the sewage backups, in the first 9 months of 2021, we registered 96 sewage backups in basements, causing damage similar to what's shown in this picture here. You can go to the next slide. Another impact of extreme weather is what are called combined sewer overflows. Earlier, I told you that in a combined sewer system, sewage and rainwater flow through combined system to the city's advanced wastewater treatment plant, where it's treated, and most of the time, this system works fine. However, there are times during extreme weather events when the system will become overwhelmed and the wastewater treatment plant is not able to handle the flow coming through the system. That results in what are called combined sewer overflows. Next slide. In a typical year, we might have 55 to 65 combined sewer overflows, and they happen at places like you see here. There are 5 of these outfalls along the Conestoga River. Each of them is outfitted with the sign similar to what you see there, as well as warning lights, and I'll show you another picture of those in a minute. So 55 to 65 times a year, this may happen. Between January and September of 2021, we've had 51 overflow events. Now, an overflow event could be as brief as 10 to 15 minutes. And it doesn't occur at every single one of these 5 overflows every time there's an overflow, at every one of the outfalls. The overflow events generally end shortly after it stops raining, and they don't occur every time it rains. So let's look at when it does occur. If you go to the next chart, you can begin to put the pieces together. Lots of rain results in more combined sewer overflows. So if you think back to 2018 when we had a lot of rain, you can see in the chart before you, the rain is shown with the blue line with the blue boxes. You can see in 2018, for instance, we had 63 inches of rain. We also had a higher number of overflow events as shown in the bar graph there, the brown bar graph. When we look at individual overflow events more closely, we come to understand how the change in storm intensity and duration seen in recent years impacts our system. So you can go to the next slide, please. This chart shows the 5 events with the highest overflow volumes, okay, so gallons of overflow between January and June 2021. And if we look at the amount of precipitation, which is the area I've highlighted there in the red box, you can see that each of these events, we got nearly an inch or more of rain. I also want to point out the difference in precipitation at the 2 sites where we have rain gauges. If you look across at the June 11th event, you'll see that in Ingleside we got 2.26 inches, and at the water plant we only got less than an inch, 0.8 of an inch. Again, it resulted in the overflows. This shows how the irregular rain patterns can be and have an impact on the city, and they're called what we might call microbursts, result in this kind of erratic rainfall measurements. So now let's take a look at the next slide and look at the impact of Hurricane Ida. So Ida, which rolled through here in early September, not only caused significant damage from flooding, but also contributed more than half as much of the combined sewer overflow volume in one event as we saw in the entire 8 months prior. So 5.7 inches at the Ingleside plant, 5.3 inches of precipitation at the water plant, 176 million gallons of combined sewer overflow versus that entire 8 months. Another event which you may recall would be the one in August 18th, I believe it was, where we got 4.3 inches of rain in 90 minutes. And that was the pictures that I showed you earlier with the manhole cover and the handicap plate having been lifted up. So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll look at the 5 smallest overflow events during the first 6 months of 2021. And here what I want to point out is that even though we have rainfall of less than a quarter inch in some of these cases, we still had overflows. And again, that's a result of the intensity of the rainfall and what that can do. It can just overwhelm our system. Too much rain too quickly. So our response is adaptation and resilience. That's really where we're focusing our attention now, is on adaptation and resilience. If you'll go to the next slide. We realize that we can no longer rely on the past to predict the future. There's a word that engineers use to define this situation. It's called non-stationarity. So that's what we're dealing with now, is non-stationarity. As you can imagine, that's quite a challenge for people in the Department of Public Works and in the engineering world. How do we deal with this? So the question we have to ask ourselves now is, how do we adapt to the changes we're seeing, and how do we become more resilient? Next slide, please. For one, we take steps to prepare. When we know a storm is coming, DPW collection crews take steps to make sure we're ready. They do things like cleaning stormwater inlets. If you remember, I told you that we have over 3,000 stormwater inlets in the city. Obviously, they are not able to get out to all of those, so they have prioritized the ones that they focus on. And to become more resilient, we want to engage the public in helping keep these inlets free of debris in the future. Next slide. Regular activities like leaf collection in the fall, street sweeping on a regular cycle, and cleaning screens like the picture shown in the middle there that catch leaves and debris that gets into the sewer system help ensure that our system functions most efficiently during extreme storms. We also perform regular maintenance and repairs on equipment like pumps that are critical to the operations. Some of the ways that we're adapting to these more frequent and intense storms includes making sure that we have plenty of empty dumpsters in order to put the debris that's collected. And we also have more operators on hand at the treatment plant during extreme weather to make sure that the treatment plant is operating most efficiently. Erecting barricades is another action that's taken that I didn't show here on the slide. If you go to the next slide, the city has a FOG program, which addresses proper disposal of fats, oils, and grease, which is an important factor in efficient operation of the system. As you can see here, the materials can cause blockages in the sewer system, contributing to overflows during heavy rain events and even during dry weather occasionally. You can see overflows because of these clogs. Regular inspections of restaurants and other commercial enterprises that generate these wastes helps ensure that they are being disposed of properly and not clogging up the sewer system. Another thing we're doing to become more resilient is using green infrastructure to reduce the volume of stormwater that enters the sewer system. And green infrastructure can also help mitigate other climate change impacts like extreme heat, which is a significant threat to public health. There are 70 completed green infrastructure projects in the city now with 329 individual BMPs, best management practices, all of which require regular inspection and maintenance. Next slide, please. An example of adaptation are these warning lights that we've installed at each of the combined sewer overflow outfalls. The lights call attention to the sign, which alerts people to avoid contact with the water during an overflow, and for a period of 24 hours after an overflow event has ended. So this picture is the most northernmost outfall location. And I stopped there on my way down here this afternoon, and grabbed this picture of the light lit up. That is a light that is illuminated there, indicating that there had been a combined sewer overflow within the last 24 hours. Next slide, please. And as Steve mentioned, we're also working on updating the combined sewer overflow or long-term control plan in accordance with the consent decree with the US EPA and Department of Environmental Protection. We've got an estimated completion date of sometime in 2022. That may be optimistic, but we are continuing to chug along with that and keeping all of these factors in mind as we do so. You can go to the next slide real quickly, just an update on where we are in the process of that. There were a lot of initial reports that had to be done. Those have been completed. The system characterization, really understanding what we've got. We had a public meeting in November 2020 with really remarkable turnout, given that it was held during the pandemic. We had about 70 people attend that meeting virtually, and had very good input and conversation with the people at that meeting. Now we're identifying and evaluating different alternatives for reducing combined sewer overflows, and we'll share what we've found at our next public meeting, which we expect will be held in early 2022. We do have an advisory committee that we're using to help provide input and feedback in the community. I want to just go through the list of people who are serving on that committee. These are people who have just been a tremendous help to us so far. Kristen Thomas, Miguel E. Como, Derek Birch, Tanae Darby, Isaiah Rosario, Walanda McLeod, Kathleen Carroll Sullivan, Dean Evans, Steve Garner, and Lori Pagan. These are all people who are devoting time to really digging in and understanding this very technical issue, but they understand that what they're there for is to give us their perspective as residents and help us understand how to communicate this highly technical information, and also to give us feedback on the priorities that they feel like we should be focusing on. They'll be having their third meeting next week on November 11th. And finally, engaging the public in all of this work is a top priority for the team that's working on this project. We have a great group of residents, as I said, who are providing us with feedback, the Residents Advisory Committee. Our stormwater team in the Sustainability and Environment Division continues to do a tremendous job of outreach. We've participated in a number of events in the last 4 or 5 months or so, starting with the Juneteenth celebration down at Lancaster County Park at the invitation of Spice of Life. We went down and did some education down there and began something that has turned into something really exciting for us. At the last minute, we said, hey, why don't we take our iPad along and ask people if they want to tell us stories about their connection to the river. We were really astounded by the feedback and response that we got. We collected 2 or 3 stories that day, had other people say, oh yeah, I remember so-and-so who lived down along the river. They'd be able to talk about that and interested in it. So what we did was we ended up applying for a grant from the Lancaster Clean Water Foundation and the Lancaster Community Foundation to undertake a project called River Connections, Stories of Lancastrians' Connections to Water. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be recording people's stories about this deep, rich history and connection that the community has with the river. And then we'll be engaging local artists of all different types to help us convert those stories into other forms of art that can then be shared and disseminated more broadly. So the project really is twofold. It's one, helping people who might not understand the connections of disproportionately, historically marginalized communities and their connections to these natural resources. So we want to elevate those stories. But then we also want to help a broader community also understand the work that's being done and build a better sense of stewardship for our natural resources. So we're really excited about that project. And we know that people of Lancaster have a rich, meaningful history. We are doing what we can to protect the river. Climate change is a real challenge. And with that, I will just say that's all we've got, unless you have anything else you want to add, Steve. And we're happy to take questions.
Right. The only other couple of things I would like to add is the engagement with the public is not only to give us the input about what is of import or not of import to the public as we move forward, but there's a huge component of the long-term control plan called the financial capability assessment, which goes to what can the city of Lancaster actually afford in best management practices to be able to improve the quality of the water and the work that we do here. Part of it suggests how we may or may not engage with entities upriver, but it also makes it clear, not only from our point of view, but to DEP, what we can afford. The DEP historically generally has said that they want you to pay for as much as you possibly can pay for, but this financial capability assessment piece is a relatively new weighting of the financial capability of the city or of any municipality to undertake these kinds of interventions.
Thank you for your report. Do we have any questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor Soto?
Certainly, please.
Thank you both for that presentation. It was very enlightening, and thank you for all the hard work you guys are doing for making our city more resilient as we face these challenges. Question about the green infrastructure. Are there incentives or tools that residents can utilize themselves that the city offers for potentially green infrastructure projects that they want to pursue?
Yeah. I can take a stab at
Sure.
it. And Cindy, if I miss anything, Cindy McCormick can speak to that. But there is a grant program that's available right now. It's a residential grant program. People can find information about it on Engage Lancaster and also on the stormwater page, the city's stormwater page on the website. And you can apply for assistance to install green infrastructure projects on your own property. So that's probably the most, I guess,
Obvious and
yeah.
straightforward way.
right.
Other ways, each of the community organizations that we engage with, when we talk about green infrastructure possibilities, they are often invited when we're talking about paving or upgrading streets, et cetera. They can often suggest the kinds of projects that may make sense to them, and we can tap into these same kinds of resources. Our regulations are slowly but increasingly being transformed so that it makes it clearer if you are a developer, whether a private residence, or a larger developer for larger scale development, what you can do and how you can do it. And we as city are encouraging as much green infrastructure as solution as possible, rather than gray, which is often but not always, a more costly and less flexible means of addressing those concerns. We've let the development community know that we are not entertaining waivers for stormwater management lightly, that they need to be able to prove to us that they've done everything that they can to fulfill the intention of the stormwater guidelines, and where necessary, we're revisiting those to make sure that they are clearer to the development community as well.
That's great.
Cindy, were there other things that we've missed?
I would just say that we're putting more of a focus on our urban tree canopy as well, with the hiring of a new urban forester. And a lot of our partnerships, I think we're working towards, making sure that outreach to residents and making them understand the programs and resources that are available to them. We're definitely keeping that up with, the new hire with the urban forest, and then also with our partners like the Alliance for the Bay. So there's more to come, I think, with that related to ways that residents can become more engaged.
Great, thank you. And last question, and more out of curiosity, the green alley there was a photo in the presentation. What's the story behind that? I remember walking by it and I thought it was very impressive, but are there more projects like that throughout the city? Is that something that the neighborhood participated in, or was that a public alleyway that the city redid?
I believe that one was a public alley that the city redid, and there are also, various alleys that we have worked on, both public and common, to install, basically underground type storage for a lot of them. But yeah, that's probably one of, I would say, 6 or 7 that we've completed within the city.
Great. Oh, thank you.
We could provide a map of the different locations of the different green infrastructure projects, if that would be of interest.
Right. I think it is available right now, but we can make sure we can point you to it.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from council?
I do have a few questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Councilman.
Thank you so much for presenting on this topic. Like you were talking about the advisory committee, right? It's like really logistics oriented, but it has real impacts. So I do have a few questions. Logistically, I saw when you were talking about the combined sewer overflow, there was this permitted. Could you explain a little bit more of what's permitted? Also, like in terms of the number of overflows that are happening typically for us versus what is permitted.
Can you take that, or do you want me to take that?
If you will.
So I am not intimately familiar with the city's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES permit. But I will tell you that the city is allowed a certain discharge limit within that permit. And I don't know what the numbers are around that, but that, again, is information that we could provide to you But that is really critical. Now with the long-term control plan that we're developing, what we're doing is we are looking at demonstrating that a reduction in the combined sewer overflows meets the water quality requirements. And I'll also just take a minute to mention that one of the things we're dealing with here is a river that has background contamination. And this is one of the things that we've been talking with the community about quite a bit, is that the entire length of the Conestoga River, 62 miles, from up near Morgantown all the way down to the mouth of the Susquehanna, is what's called impaired, think polluted, and it is not suitable for recreational use. So we're dealing with a situation where we're reducing an impact that occurs 55 to 65 times a year, roughly, on a river that has existing pollution 365 days a year.
And if I can jump in, what we've also found is that parts of the cleanest part of the river are the areas here in the city. What we take dirtier water out of the river and return cleaner water back to the river. So the extent to which we can think about reducing and or eliminating some of the CSOs or the smaller outflows gives us a greater length of potential recreation area. It does not fully solve the problem. We need to work closely with the entities upstream where many of the pollutants originate in the first place. We need to be able to continue to work with our partners in the Lancaster Clean Water Partners, among others, to figure out how we can make a greater impact. And because we are subject to the consent decree, we need to have solutions that are cost-effective, affordable for us, and will give the greatest benefit to the greatest citizens in the greatest areas of need. Southeast, for instance, is one of the areas that has the least playgrounds and access to certain kinds of recreation. Even though the park, the river is up against County Park, those are not considered neighborhood parks. So the extent to which we can think about access to the river differently as a resource for those immediate communities and neighborhoods, it's also to all of our benefits.
And if I could just add one other item to that, the long-term control plan that we're embarking on and in the process of working through with EPA basically sets a goal of 0. And that, I think we just have to keep in mind as we are moving into a new reality with climate change, the severity of the storms, the frequency of a lot of volume of rain happening, and our ability to get to essentially 0, which is going to be incrementally, we want to see incremental reductions in the number of overflows, but as you saw on Mary's chart, the amount of rain really affects our ability to manage the volume, and our system is built for a certain amount of rain and volume, and our ability to build controls that meet average precipitation when that average precipitation continues to escalate is particularly daunting.
That all makes sense. I appreciate that. To follow on that then, what government is responsible for the upstream?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very good question. It's a combination of a variety. It's a combination of a variety of governments. There are municipal governments, county government, state government, and there's the federal, at the federal level as well. The Chesapeake is a national watershed, and it goes from the northern reaches of Pennsylvania. It includes much of Maryland, some of Virginia, much of Delaware, et cetera. So it's a huge complex, and we work at every one of those levels to work with the municipalities or the jurisdictions to make whatever impact we can. I think we have a key partnership with the Lancaster Clean Water Partners because they have a huge focus and emphasis on agricultural upland impact. And we are, the way that we're working with our other municipal partners, whether it's Mannheim Township or some of the other municipalities, is creating greater awareness about the nature and the breadth of the problem facing us. The project that the MOU focuses on in our next item, which is the Little Conestoga, is a case in point of how our intervention can be a part of building a regional partners in the solution of making this work. So we have to stay away from or get out of the idea that we are a silo, that we can only control the things that literally we have physical control over. We have to be partnering with the different municipalities and entities in order to make a much larger difference.
Has that ideology been accepted by the other governments so far?
It is by different ones at different levels, and I think I'm suggesting that one area where there's some meteoric potential transformation is that relationship with our neighbor to the north, because so much of the work that we have done, that the city has done, and that we've done in terms of outreach on a variety of levels is to get them to understand the nature of the impact, not just to the city of Lancaster and its inhabitants, but to the region itself, that it does, by extension, have an effect on its population and its potential to develop, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. I really appreciate that. I do have a couple more questions. When you were talking about prioritizing certain inlets when you have an anticipated event, what is your process for that prevention? Are we looking at it from the perspective of preventing as much overflow as possible, or are we looking at neighborhoods and communities that can't deal as well as others in the repair caused by these overflows?
So to a huge extent, a lot of it is what has our historical experience been? How have certain intersections performed over the last few storm events or over the last several years? And much of our priority in terms of what kind of green infrastructure or other stormwater and CSO intervention is based on how do we reduce or mitigate the already bad impacts of either excess flooding or of new situations that have come about due to development or the unexpected. We also have resuscitated, if you will, and you've heard me mention it before, our Adopt a Block program is being expanded to be the Adopt It program. So over the last several storm events, certainly over the last 2 months or so, we reach out to the community and say, to the extent that you can or feel comfortable, please clear out those storm grates in your communities. Because even if our people were able to clean all the storm grates at the beginning of the storm, we're not able to be there 2, 3, 4 hours later and clean them out the second time or the third time. So greater public awareness is part of how we try to address this. But we also do a I don't want to say the word mortem, but a post-event assessment of what were the areas that had the greatest adverse impact, and what are those areas that we need to put some attention into that helps develop what our capital and other planning is for the foreseeable future. For you in fact, will see probably a couple of things in our upcoming budget proposal that reflect the fact that our priorities are based on the areas that are most adversely impacted and or where we have the access to make changes or improvements that might not otherwise have been done. In some cases where we don't necessarily have that as a natural outflow, we are reaching out to either the property owners or to the entities that are affected to see how can we partner with them to address some of those concerns.
Great. Again, thank you. And this is my last question, I promise. To your last point about the financial capability assessment, from your perspective, I know it's very preliminary, but what can we afford? Like when we're looking out, how much of this realistically are we able to afford?
So I believe very strongly that we're going to be able to afford to make a significant impact.
Okay.
I know that, if you're looking for a dollar number, we can't give you a dollar number. The nature of the assessment process is allowing us to look at a variety of individual solutions and potential integrated solutions and see what their relative impact is to addressing this concern.
Okay.
Everyone, including the advisory committee members, have been apprised of the fact that we're not going to make the perfect the enemy of the good, that we need to be able to do something that is going to be beneficial to everyone in the community, and that is not going to suddenly increase the cost of provision of water, stormwater, wastewater in our communities. We recognize, and they recognize, I believe, that there will be some increases in that cost, but we should not assume that we're going to just do whatever will bring us absolutely to quote-unquote zero, but we will be doing the things as best we can that will mitigate or reduce the impact and hopefully build an infrastructure that can be either continued or built upon in the future. So I think one of our hardest tasks is getting all of us, including the lay people, to understand and speak in the terminology that makes sense and to become the kind of advocates for what we can afford, what we should afford, and what's going to be in the best interest of our utility and community.
Thank you to the three of you. I know this is something that, like Mayor said, is getting progressively worse. So your work is just constantly uphill. And so I'm really grateful. I think the work that you're doing has tremendous health impacts, even on our community, that we should be prioritizing this subject. So I appreciate you presenting. And that's it.
Thank you, Councilor. Are there any more questions from the council?
I do have a question, Councilor Soto.
Please, Councilor Diaz.
In regards to the fog control, can you, in a ballpark, I would say, do you have an idea how many issues you have found in, like, businesses? Like, is there a percentage of problems that you may have with certain businesses in reference to the breaking, I would say, penalties, fines, or other costs because of the obstruction due to fog?
So I think it's a very, very good question. We are approaching the end of a 10 to 12 month period where we will have had our fog inspector on board. We only, at the earlier part of this year, were able to acquire a fog inspector, and it has made a huge difference, I will say, in the impact not only on restaurants and on many of the industries, but it has allowed us to have a much stronger emphasis on enforcement. But I will need to go back, because we have not gotten through a full year of this yet, and be able to pull together numbers of what has happened over the course of this last year. This year will be, in many ways, a baseline for fog intervention because we have not had an aggressive fog program in the past. We've been able to do it as we can without a fog inspector, but this is the year that we're going to be, in essence, establishing the baseline, and we'll be able to measure and improve from that baseline in the future.
So with your expertise, would you say that this would bring down the elimination or possibly some of it, overflow issues that we have currently? Like, for example, so if we haven't had a strong hold on the inspections, would you say that maybe 50% of it would control some of the overflow? Would you say 30%? I just kind of want to know, like, a ballpark.
So you're asking very, very good questions, and we don't really have a way yet of assessing what percentage or what part of the infrastructure is adversely affected and to what extent. Having said that, part of the fog inspection program is not just dealing with volume, it's also partly dealing with quality. So there's a variety of factors that we're trying to measure, and I'm hoping that at the end of a year or so, we'll be able to present to council and to the public a set of factors that can be can be understood and that can be regularly measured that would show our progress in that area. I know that it's important to be able to try to identify and quantify. At this particular moment, we're still confirming what is out there and the extent of the effect of some of the fog challenges.
I seem to
Thank you so
recall,
much.
excuse me,
Hello?
I think she was thanking us.
I seem to recall in the conversations about adding a fog inspector in the budget process, this was also something that was regulatory in nature. And so this is something that we were required to implement as our part of our overall system operations. And so as we can get to the end of this first year of reporting, I'm assuming that there's also some regulatory reporting that goes right along with that we can share with council?
That is correct. There will be audited reports that can be shared as well.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I can just make a point about that, what is required is what's called a 9 minimum controls plan. So I think it's important to understand that this is an issue that the city has been working on for a long time. There are a lot of actions that the city's been taking to reduce combined sewer overflows and reduce the impact. And one of them that we hear regularly about is street sweeping. And when we let people know that part of the reason it's important to be able to sweep the streets is because it helps keep the river clean, it really resonates with people. So again, that is one of the requirements of the 9 minimum controls plan, and as is the fog program.
And you'll see hints of some of that with the budget presentation, the needs that we have to fulfill and the ways that we're wanting to incrementally increase performance.
Are there any questions from the public? That being said, I want to thank you for your report. I believe council will be waiting to hear further reports and further comments that have been discussed here tonight. And once again, I thank you. Thorough report.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to be part of this.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move into Administration Bill Number 23, 2021, authorizing a memorandum of understanding with the Lancaster Township for the Conestoga Creek. And I believe we have several partners to report on this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, this is an initiative that I'm very, very excited about. It's one that I believe touches on some of the things that we mentioned in the earlier presentation, where we are not only increasing awareness about the water quality in the region, but also making partnerships with the municipalities as well as the private individuals that have some purview over those particular pieces. This is a particular case where our hope is that our relatively minor and very specific limited investment leverages a host of other opportunities and will continue to improve the quality of the Little Conestoga, not only as a water feature, but as a recreational source connected to our network of recreational facilities. So again, you're all familiar with Cindy McCormick, our city engineer and the head of our public right-of-way organization. And I want to introduce Jim Schultz and Corey Rothman from Land Studies, who is the consultant to the Little Conestoga Blue-Green River Initiative. Cindy, do you want to say a couple words before we turn it over to? So I'm just going to turn it directly over to Jim, and he'll take the presentation from here.
I'm going to keep that slide up for time being. Good evening. My name is Jim Schultz, and I want to thank you for considering our request to approve an intergovernmental agreement ordinance for the Blue-Green Corridor project for the Little Conestoga Creek. I'm the overall manager for the project, and with me tonight is Corey Rothman, senior engineer representing Land Studies Incorporated, one of our consultants on this project. The Steinman Foundation, through its affiliate, the Little Conestoga Creek Foundation, formed a team in early 2019 to undertake this stream restoration, which is the blue aspect of the project, and the walking trail, which is the green aspect of the project. Project starts, as you can see from the map, on the left-hand side at Marietta Avenue and travels north. So from left to right is from south to north, where the Little Conestoga Creek then intersects with Swar Run. Our team, which includes John Cox, former chair of the Lancaster Clean Water recommendation for municipal Creek Foundation. So if you start from the left, parcel across the street, however, by the Steinman Foundation, and will be transformed into a trailhead, the southern terminus trailhead for this project. Then what happens is you come across Marietta Avenue, and both the stream restoration project or to the west side. On the southern side, on the south side, you have Franklin Marshall's property. Way up through Dorwood Park, which is owned by La Swama, which also has a walking trail system. You have the crossings. This again is all in Manheim Township. The trail then goes under the for Southern in terms of the rail line that they have there, and we're making very, very good progress, and we're really appreciative of their cooperation. Then as you get under the underpass, you're now heading home, and Woodcrest Villa, which is also a Mennonite home. And there, right in that area, you have the city of Lancaster, a little pinprick of Park City. And that's really the only part of this entire project that has some part of the city in it, is the little outfall. It's not a little outfall, but it's an outfall from Park City. That's the only part where the city's actually touching it. But under regulations from, and Corey can describe this with DEP, anything within a mile of your boundary, we can include in this project in terms of the MS4 credits that we're going to be talking about in a second. So as you work your way again to the right, terminus, which is actually in Manheim Township, but and owned by East. To describe 2. Stream restoration in Lancaster County history. We would have a significant pollution reduction for the Chesapeake Bay. There is the potential, very real potential, and we're going to talk about this in more detail, of MS4 pollution reduction credits for each of the 4 municipal governments, and those involved, as I mentioned, are Lancaster Township, the city of Lancaster, Manheim Township, and East Enfield Township, all of which these other 3 communities are going through the same process I'm going through with you tonight, okay? So there will be creation of additional wetlands. There will be increased biodiversity. We will have a flooding reduction on the small flooding events. And besides these stream improvements, there would also be a multimodal, ADA accessible recreation and commuter trail. Okay? So if you then, Bernie, put up the next slide. So this is the kind of work that Land Studies has done historically. This is what they're known for in terms of the notion of taking a stream, as you see there in the before and the after, from a standpoint of a number of things that Corey can describe as to what, and Corey is really the expert not only on MS4, but on this kind of stream restoration work. So any kind of discussion or any kind of questions you have about stream restoration, Corey is the person who can really answer those questions. If you then flip it to the next slide, you'll see a cross-section of what we're talking about from a standpoint of the stream restoration work that would be done in conjunction with the walking trail. So this would be what would be occurring throughout the entire 2.9 mile stretch of the trail, plus the stream restoration work. Maybe flip it to the next slide, Ernie. So where have we been? We started in January 2019. We began with a plan, and we completed that plan and feasibility study in October of 2019. We formed an advisory group made up of a number of community leaders, and they have been giving us feedback and suggestions about this project. We began to meet as soon as that plan was done, and we could unfurl that plan that you just saw. We could put it on literally a 8-foot-long table, and we were able to sit down with the municipal governments here in the city, with Cindy and Steve, and be able to talk to them about the project. We then sat down with all the appropriate representatives from Manheim Township, Lancaster Township, and East Tenfield Township. Then in late 2019, we began to meet with all the property owners. So all the property owners have been met with. So there are approximately 40 property owners, ranging from large property owners like High to individual residential property owners. And it was really interesting to do this during the pandemic. We began to have Zoom meetings in 2020 as opposed to across-the-table meetings that we were able to do in 2019. But we met with all the owners. And most important of all, they got comfortable with the project to the point where they gave us a written document to allow us to do the survey work, to actually go on their property and do the work. So a lot of work has been done with the property owners to get them comfortable with this project. Number 5 there, we have met with significant funders, both in terms of the what's called D&E or design and engineering costs, but also for full project construction costs. And we can describe that in just a second, as you'll see here in a minute. All the activity that we've done, that we've undertaken to date, has been paid for from these sources that are listed here, which is the Steinman Foundation to the tune of about $1.1 million. In addition, we received Act 13 funding from Lancaster County, and they're considering a 5-year commitment over the next 5 years of $100,000 a year. And lastly, $130,000 from a variety of private donors. Due to John Cox's relationship with the funders, we have received $880,000 to date for the first phase of the construction, which would be on the Marietta Avenue area, from the Department of Environmental Protection Clean Water Program, and also from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation Small Watershed Program. And I'm pleased to announce that John just sent us an email. I think he knew this meeting was happening today, so he just sent us an email today saying that we are going to get a $500,000 grant from the federal EPA to support this project. So as you can see here, we have applications pending with Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and from DEP's Growing Greener program. The intent is to have state and federal agencies fund the entire project, which we've estimated to be approximately $14 million. We estimate that that's going to take us 5 to 7 years, and we hope to begin actual construction of the first phase in 2022. So why are we here? We're at a very important point in our discussion in terms of what this project's about. So if you go to the next slide, the MOU or Memorandum of Understanding is required by PA DEP in order to review our watershed plans and to approve sharing of MS4 credits among the 4 municipal governments. In other words, we went to DEP very early in the process and said that we really wanted to get a watershed permit as opposed to 7 individual permits, so and cut down on the time and the money that would cost. And they agreed to that, so long as we got the 4 municipal governments involved. And in turn, they said that they would, in fact, then not only approve the plans, but they would also approve the notion of sharing the MS4 credits, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All 4 municipal governments have reviewed and revised the MOU over the past 6 months. The MOU now is in a form to be approved by each municipal government, and that's what we're doing. We're reaching out now to the individual processes in each of the 4 communities. This initial MOU provides for each municipal government to receive $25,000 in MS4 credits or a $75,000 financial contribution. Lancaster Township's equivalent to that $75,000, so East Enfield Township is in for $75,000, Lancaster Township will be in for $75,000. Lancaster Township's, East Enfield and Manheim Township are in for $75,000. Lancaster Township's equivalent is they're going to build the trailhead that I described earlier on that parcel to the south of the project. Subsequent MOU will take place where we'll have the 4 municipal governments agree to sharing of subsequent MS4 credits and to agree to long-term maintenance and operations of the stream restoration and the walking trail. So I'm going to turn this over to Corey right now to explain what are the MS4 credits and how they would benefit the city of Lancaster, unless you want me to stop right now and answer any questions about the project. But other than that, I will turn it over to Corey to describe the MS4 credits.
Are there any questions so far from the committee?
I do have a question. Oh, not committee. Just kidding.
From council?
I have a question, and it's more just as we go into the MS4 credits, let's see if you can talk about this. If you receive MS4 credits at one point through this collaboration, does that prevent us as a single entity from getting our own credits in the future? So as you're explaining what they are.
So no, that won't prohibit you from getting any credits, whether you do it on your own or whether you get it from other source. It does not prohibit you from doing that.
And I just have one. As we move along this project from beginning to end, is there any land that needs to be acquired to maintain the vision of the plan?
So what we're doing, Council Soto, is we're getting easements. We have to show the funders that we have control over the land on which we're going to do the stream restoration. So we're going to have easements for stream restoration. We're also going to have easements for the walking trail. So right now we have easements in front of F&M, in front of High. So we have to get easements. We're not going to own the land. We're going to have easements, and that's going to give us control of the land to be able to go to the funders and say we have control.
Thank you. That answers my question. You may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. So if we go to the next. And the city has a permit from DEP that's issued by DEP and enforced by DEP that controls this MS4 system. And as part of this MS4 permit that you have, it has 7 components to it. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is just one of those components, and that's the pollutant reduction plan. And so what's the requirement of this pollutant reduction plan? Well, as it sounds, it's to reduce pollutants that are being getting into your system or being discharged from your system. Those pollutants are typically or are sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and they're measured in pounds. Now, conveniently, the DEP has said for their current permit that as long as you reduce 1 pound of sediment, you'll be taking care of the requirements for nitrogen and phosphorus. So as we move forward, we typically talk about pounds of sediment, right? Because they then deal with nitrogen and phosphorus. So you have a permit, you have a pollutant reduction plan, you have to reduce so many pounds of pollutants over your permit cycle, which is a 5-year permit cycle. The majority of all municipalities across the state of Pennsylvania have to do the same thing. They have a pollutant reduction plan. So you're required to design and construct various projects to reduce the pollutants. Now, the little Conestoga project proposes approximately 1 million pounds of sediment reduction. And the city, through participation in the MOU, can then participate in those or obtain those pollutant reductions. So again, looking at the one MS4 credit equaling one pollutant reduction, you can see how participation in this MOU makes a lot of sense. So if you go to the next slide, please. What ultimately are the benefits? Well, by obtaining these MS4 credits, you're then meeting some of the requirements of your pollutant reduction plan. It won't meet all of them, but it'll certainly meet some of them, or, and depending upon your level of participation, you know, it can meet. Sorry. So by obtaining the credits, you're reducing the amount of projects that you have to construct and maintain. Ultimately, or also by thinking of the city as a very built-out environment, finding the location for these projects is much more difficult than in a more rural municipality where you have a lot of ability to find project locations. I think, and our team believes that one of the biggest benefits to the city is the significant value that this brings to the city. When you look at the $75,000 contribution for 25,000 credits, and a credit being a pound of pollutant reduction, you're looking at $3 per pound of pollutant reduction. I can't speak to the specific cost per pound of city projects, but I'm very confident that $3 per pound is much, much less than what the city is doing for some of your projects that are being put in the city. And then lastly, by obtaining these MS4 credits through this MOU process, and then not having to do any design or construction, you're providing capacity for city staff to work on all the other projects that you have, that Mary has talked about, from the green infrastructure projects that are going on throughout the city. So there's a really great benefit that I believe is available to the city through the participation in the MOU. And I guess with that, I'll go to the next slide and turn it over to Jim.
So just to sort of conclude, we consider this, and the Steinman Foundation in particular considers this project to be transformational in many respects. Number one, getting 4 municipal governments to work on something together. And it's taken me 18 months to get to this point, to in fact have an MOU that I've gotten 4 solicitors to agree to. And so as a result, okay, we have that. Number two, we're restoring a polluted stream. You've just heard what Mary was talking about, you've heard what Corey is talking about, and we're building a multimodal, completely accessible trail next to this recreational facility. So we're requesting approval of the ordinance for the intergovernmental agreement, which contains the MOU. The agreement contains the MOU and the $75,000 contribution from the city. So that's why we're here tonight, and I will be back on the 9th, I guess it would be, for your first reading. I'll be back on the 23rd for your second reading.
Are there any questions from the committee? Are there any questions from council?
Councilor Soto?
Councilor Bay, please.
Thank you. So you mentioned that one of the features of the MS4 pollution reduction plan is that you have to get so much reduction over the permit period, which is 5 years. Does this project, will this essentially go through one period, or will it be ongoing? Do those credits continue to happen over the years that this project is in place?
Good question.
So the permit cycle requires so many pounds of pollutant reduction. There'll be another permit cycle that likely will require another significant amount. The pounds of reduction that would be obtained through this project would be credited towards whatever permit cycle you're in, and would last for, for that permit cycle. And then once you get to the next one, then you're on to another project. So I'm not sure if I've,
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
Counselor Soto,
Yes, Council President.
if I may, regarding the $75,000 financial contribution, really my questions are just, in which calendar year would we be distributing it, and whence in the budget would it come?
Thank you. It is budgeted in the 2021 calendar year, and we would be distributing it, hopefully with this, with approval of this, we'd be distributing it almost immediately before the end of the fiscal year.
So essentially right after we pass the ordinance.
Yes, that's correct. Or shortly thereafter. I
Right.
think we have to make sure that the other municipalities have approved as well.
The ordinance calls for the distribution of 75,000 by December 31st.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, you may have answered this already, but how long is this project going to, from beginning to start? What are we looking at in time span? We looking at 6 months? We looking a couple years, or what?
Optimistically, 5 years, probably realistically 7 years.
7 years from beginning to end? And that will encompass all the credits that we're going to be getting now?
And what will happen is, as the construction goes on, the credits will be derived.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council?
I have one question.
Councilor Valito, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is more for learning purposes. So in your before and after pictures, the erosion of the riverbank, how do you build something back that's more resilient? Like in the previous conversation, we were talking about increased rain and increased flooding. What is the process of building something back that's more resilient?
Sure. So in the situation that you saw on the screen and in the situation of this project, what we're actually doing is removing sediment. So right now, through the length of this project, there are stream banks that are anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 feet high. And what that does is, in our smaller storm events, anywhere from an inch to 2 to even 3 inches of rain, everything's confined within that stream channel, and it causes tremendous amount of erosion along those exposed stream banks. So what we'll do is actually excavate that material over the width of the floodplain where we can. Sometimes we're constrained by sewer lines or other utilities, but to the extent we can, we'll actually excavate that material. And what we do is bring the stream bank to maybe 6-9 inches above the water surface elevation, so that when we get those 1 inch or 2 inch rain events, we then activate the floodplain. And what that does is it dramatically reduces the velocity of the stream and thereby reducing the shear stresses, so we don't have the erosion along the stream banks. So, and one of the, I guess the most important thing, one of the things that we focus on at Land Studies is bringing it back to a historical condition. So, pre-settlement of this area in Pennsylvania, that's what the streams look like. You don't have the exposed stream banks, which a lot of us grew up thinking, hey, this is what a normal stream looks like, and it really wasn't. It was something where you had a small rain event, and the floodplains were activated and accessed by the floodwaters to reduce the shear stresses. And that's in answering your question on resiliency. By reducing those velocities and reducing those shear stresses, then you have a resilient system. And so that kind of goes to what we're doing as part of this project.
The stream restoration estimate is approximately $9 million of the $14 million I quoted before. Of that $9 million, about 30% is getting rid of the dirt. So it's a big, big item, and that's why we are looking for the state and feds to give us the money, because they're under the gun as well as we are to do something about the pollution level.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Are there any questions from the public? Well, I guess that concludes the Public Works Committee. Council President.
Mr. Slater, we have a motion.
May I have a motion to move this resolution forward to the next council meeting?
I'll motion to move this resolution to the council meeting of November 9th.
Second? All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that will conclude the Public Works Committee for November 1st, 2021.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Councilor Soto. Mr. Harris?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you all.
Sorry, the clerk's report for November, some of the things I've done. The Pennsylvania Municipal League Summit, I attended that, helped build Milburn Park. Thank you. I prepared copies of presentation copies of the PRO Act and Fair Trade resolutions. I prepared and mailed HARB and Historical Commission appointment letters. I supplied 2020 resolution and ordinance lists for the city's cost study, 2016 and 2017 lead hazard ordinance to Norristown, 2006 floodplain ordinance to a member of the public, research the legislative careers of two recently deceased council members. I prepared the quarterly review of boards, commissions, and authority appointments. I researched visitor house rental for a constituent, and I updated the council handbook in preparation for a new council member. I made various meeting arrangements, attended the parking authority meeting, ensured that a second round of bond documents were signed and provided to the bond council, updated the zoning map online, following the rezoning of the 300 block of Liberty Street, which we've done, and various other things.
Sounds like you had a busy month. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Having nothing else, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.